Hey guys, tonight we sink into the murky glow of paper lanterns lining a narrow Edo alley, where cherry blossoms drift in the breeze like drifting memories. You can almost taste the cool night air mingled with distant incense, and you shiver at the thought of samurai shadows flitting across clay walls. Nobody said bedtime was going to be comfortable. You might think bedtime stories are all soft pillows and teddy bears? Think again. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Let me know where you're tuning in from and what your local time is. Now, let's ease into tonight's journey through history together. Picture Edo around the late 17th century when the Tokugawa shogunate has solidified its grip on Japan. The city stretches in every direction, lantern-lit streets converging on the castle where the shogun's authority reigns supreme. You stand at the edge of a bustling market, listening to merchants hawk rice and lacquerware, the stink of fish carted along muddy roads mingling with wood smoke. Somewhere nearby, a magistrate's clerk is busy recording that day's punishments. He etches strokes on mulberry paper with swift precision, marking names that may never again be spoken aloud without shame. Imagine stepping forward, toes barely making a sound on the polished boards of a magistrate's hall. The air here is colder, weighed down by the dread of those awaiting judgment. A low wooden platform stands raised at the center, where a stern-faced official in heavy robes sits, observing a line of villagers and low-ranking samurai. You feel a tickle of unease as you recall that, factually, samurai were expected to uphold an ironclad code of conduct called bushid, and even a minor lapse could strip a man of honor in the blink of an eye. As you slip into the hush of the hall, lantern light casts long shadows that reach for you like silent fingers. You catch a glimpse of a young samurai kneeling, head bowed. The magistrate consults his ledger, each entry a story of Dishina. If you were that samurai, you wonder how you would cling to integrity when your name is dragged through the mud. The scent of smoke from a nearby brazier mixes with sweat and fear, and you swallow hard, feeling your pulse echo in your ears as though the hall itself were breathing alongside you. The magistrate clears his throat, and you feel the crowd's collective intake of breath echoing off bamboo walls. In a calm voice, he pronounces that this young man will be branded with punishment, a flogging for insubordination followed by banishment to Hatchage Island. A mainstream historical fact, petty insubordination against one's lord could indeed earn a samurai 50 lashes followed by seppuku or exile, depending on rank. You shiver as you imagine the weight of that sentence pressing into flesh, a reminder that the hierarchies here are as sharp as any blade. Despite the gravity of the moment, a fringe tale drifts to your mind. Some whispers claim that punishment boards, called ITA, bore caricatures of criminals so exaggerated they looked closer to kabuki villains, though no one knows if those caricatures truly existed or are simply Edo folklore. The thought that someone might have turned shame into performance art in 1650s Japan both cracks a smile and chills your spine. Who would dare mock justice itself? You almost laugh, then remember that a laugh can echo too loud in a silent hall. Through the lattice window, moonlight brushes the tense faces of townspeople gathered outside, waiting to catch a glimpse of the sentence. A slight wind rustles the paper screens, and you realize that this entire assembly is meant to remind everyone that the shogunate's gaze is always upon them. No one steps out of line without risking ruin. It's as though every flicker of light is a sentinel, watching, waiting. As you step back into the corridor, the lantern-lit path stretches before you like a tunnel leading deeper into an Edo nightmare of control and public spectacle. You sense the weight of every glance, every whisper. Your jita clack on polished wood as the cool smell of pine pillars surrounds you. In your mind, you replay the fact that the Tokugawa regime kept meticulous records of each offense to preserve social order, a bureaucracy so detailed that even minor infractions were noted and punished. Yet you wonder if every record is honest, or if some were doctored to bolster the facade of a just government. Strolling back into the market district, the aroma of roasted chestnuts drifts past while you avoid meeting the gaze of a procession carrying a wooden cage with a petty thief. The thief's eyes meet yours for a moment, his face pale under lantern glow. You step aside, heart pounding, as guards escort him to another chamber for sentencing. You feel the tension in your chest. Imagining yourself trapped in that cage, paraded like a common spectacle for the crowd's morbid curiosity. You run a finger along a weathered wooden pillar of a tea house, feeling grooves carved by countless feet and the warmth still lingering from midday bustle. Nearby, a blind musician plays a shakuhachi flute, the notes weaving through night air, almost soothing. Yet you can't shake the tension. Every lantern here once witnessed a punishment, each note a reminder of society's iron fist beneath its silk robes. The juxtaposition of art and cruelty lingers on your skin like a shiver. You remember that some exiled samurai were rumored to have sent their families provisions, like cooking pots and dried seaweed, to remote islands so they could set up food stalls and eke out a living away from the capital. Even in the darkest times, people adapt in unexpected ways. Before you let your thoughts wander too far, note that fringe accounts suggest more brutal punishments, like forcing a samurai to wear burlap soaked in boiling water, might be legend rather than fact, but meticulous public records confirm that banishments were no simple holiday. The logistics alone, escorting exiles across treacherous seas, stocking far-flung islands, were a massive undertaking by the shogunate. With every step toward your lodging, you feel the city's heartbeat slow, lanterns dimming as dawn approaches. The night air feels heavier now, laden with pine smoke and memories of harsh strokes from branding irons. You glance back once, imagining those wooden cages, the raised platforms, the magistrate's cold stare. The hush of sleeping merchants begins to settle in, but you know that tomorrow, the cycle will continue under fresh sun and new judgments. As you slip into your own dark bed, you carry the echo of wooden paddles scraping stone floors, the hush of crowds, and the weight of history pressing on your eyelids. In Edo, justice was public, brutal, and unyielding. The lantern's glow fades as your lids grow heavy. As you drift off, remember that in Edo's silent nights, the past whispers secrets that might haunt or intrigue you even in dreams. You wake, or at least, you think you do, inside the quiet hum of an Edo morning, where fog clings low over the rooftops and the scent of wet cedar lingers in the air. Somewhere, a rooster protests the hour with theatrical annoyance, but the city is already beginning to stir. Down a winding street of merchant homes and tiny workshops, shutters creak open, and shopkeepers arrange their goods with a blend of pride and dread. Because today, like every day under the Tokugawa shogunate, one wrong move might cost a finger, a title, or, for the unlucky few, their entire identity. You walk along worn stones, taking care to avoid stepping in the gutters where yesterday's dust and today's misfortunes collect in puddles. You remember what governs all this, the rigid, almost reverent code that sustains samurai society. The Bukshahato, all laws for the military houses, weren't suggestions, they were the spine of order in Edo, Japan. They dictated everything from weapon ownership to dress codes to how much rice stipend a retainer deserved. Violate them, and your descent could be as fast as a katana's arc. You pass beneath a painted gate and enter a courtyard where the walls whisper discipline. Here, samurai train, less in swordplay today and more in stillness. Eyes closed, backs straight, they sit in meditation. It's almost ironic, warriors conditioned for violence forced to master patience. But discipline is everything. And discipline is what makes punishment all the more terrifying, because you, as a samurai, aren't just a person, you're a symbol. Your duty, your honor, you're an emblem stitched into the back of the nation. And symbols that crack must be shattered, publicly, for all to see. One mainstream historical fact, within samurai law, the idea of collective punishment was well established. If a retainer committed a crime, his entire household, sometimes even distant cousins, might be demoted, relocated, or punished. The concept was simple, honor wasn't individual, it was inherited. So if you stumble, your failure ripples through your bloodline like a stone dropped in still water, not exactly a cozy bedtime concept. But then again, we're here to learn, not to nap just yet. You step aside as a scroll bearer passes. His robes whisper along the stones. In his hands? A register of infractions. Somewhere on the list is a minor lord whose younger brother was caught gambling with commoners. That's right, just gambling. The brother will be lashed, and the lord? He'll spend a year confined to his estate in what we might today call a house arrest with vibes. But not all punishments are so evenly applied. You reach a side alley, narrow and hushed, where a thin man with a scar across his chin is sweeping dust into careful lines. He glances at you, but not directly. He's likely a former samurai now in disgrace. You can almost taste the shame that lingers on his breath. His crime? Scholars still debate it, but some say he refused to kneel before a higher-ranking official during a ceremonial archery competition. Whether out of arrogance or a bad knee, the shogunate didn't care. Refusal meant rebellion, and rebellion meant punishment. You head east now, toward the magistrate's archive. Within, clerks sit cross-legged with brushes in hand, dipping them into ink made from soot and animal glue. Their papers aren't novels, they're confession records, sentencing documents, and letters of apology. Pages and pages of neat calligraphy document every slip, every sin, every punishment with the precision of a sword's edge. Here's a fringe tidbit for your night. Some punishments were so symbolic that they were executed without actual violence. For instance, there were cases where a samurai's crest, the family mon, was deliberately mispainted on public notices. A crooked brushstroke, a misaligned character, and suddenly everyone in the town knew that family had dishonored itself. A silent, chilling humiliation. You lean against a beam, listening to the paper screen slide open and closed with rhythmic finality. One woman, an assistant, perhaps, places a sealed envelope into a lacquer box. That message? It's being delivered to a rural village. Inside, instructions for a small punishment involving a runaway retainer who dared to work as a merchant. Which, to Edo sensibilities, was about as shameful as it gets. A warrior selling pickled daikon? Scandalous, and if you're wondering why that matters, samurai were prohibited from engaging in trade. The class system was clear: warriors above peasants, above artisans, above merchants. And at the very bottom? Criminals and outcasts, the heining and eta. The idea was that warriors lived on rice stipends and served honor alone. Earning money through market trade was like wearing sandals to a tea ceremony, deeply improper, maybe even grotesque. The wind shifts, and with it comes the clatter of Jita sandals, someone running. You turn. A boy, maybe 13, rushes by with a sealed letter. His sash is loose, and one of his sleeves is torn. He's an errand runner for a city judge, and his face tells you he knows something grim. You follow at a distance. His path leads you to a wide stone courtyard where a crowd gathers, not frenzied, just expectant. You blend in, feeling the weight of anticipation. A voice calls out a name, and an elderly samurai steps forward. His shoulders slump, but his gait is steady. His offense? Losing an heirloom blade during a fire. A mistake, sure, but seen as symbolic negligence. He kneels. Not to beg, there is no pleading here. He receives not pain, but poetry. A public notice will be posted stating that his blade was consumed by flames due to inattentive spirit. It's part punishment, part metaphor, and wholly humiliating. It's then that you realize something: not all punishments were meant to break the body. Many were designed to fracture the soul. As the crowd disperses, murmuring like a tide pulling back from shore, you take one last look at the old samurai. He bows once, then walks away slowly, as though he has to relearn each step. Back in your lodging that night, the thin walls barely muffle the distant sound of a drum, an announcement of tomorrow's trials. You lie down, eyes tracing the wooden beams overhead, thinking not of heroes or villains but of that old man's shoes tapping softly against the stone, and for the first time, you wonder, if your honor was just a set of rules someone else wrote down, what happens when one ink stroke changes? You stir under the soft creak of wooden beams above, the smell of freshly steamed rice and morning rain soaking into the clay tiles overhead. Edo, even on a cloudy day, feels vivid, its rhythms thrumming beneath your feet like a hidden drum. As you slip out into the narrow street again, you're reminded that this isn't just a city of paper walls and sandal scuffs. It's a city obsessed with control, of class, of conduct, and especially of punishment. Today, your feet take you somewhere, stranger. You're headed to a quieter district, not far from the Sumida River. Here, the streets narrow, and the crowds thin. A lone cart rolls by, its wheels groaning under the weight of crates sealed with ropes. Not goods, these are property seizures, packed up after a conviction. One man's misconduct, neatly bound in straw and cord, destined for auction or disposal. You cross a mossy footbridge and arrive at the gate of a compound known for handling honor-preserving exiles. Sounds ironic, doesn't it? That you can be cast out with dignity. But that's the magic trick the Tokugawa shogunate performed so well, punishment wrapped in ritual, disgrace draped in formality. Inside the compound, a few men kneel in rows. Each one wears a somber travel cloak, the colors deliberately muted, gray, beige, sometimes muddy green. These aren't colors for warriors. They're colors of apology. They're waiting for their orders of Shimonagashi, violent exile. Now here's a mainstream historical fact for your mental scroll. Shimonagashi was one of the more severe punishments for samurai and officials who couldn't be executed for political or social reasons. It removed someone from the power network without shedding noble blood. You're not dead, but you may as well be. Socially? You're vapor. The air in this room feels stale, but also sharp. Like anticipation that's turned sour. One of the men sitting beside you, or not that you dare speak to him, was caught falsifying temple records to avoid a tax increase. He's young. His eyebrows twitch like he's trying not to cry. You shift your gaze, and then your eyes land on the wall scroll near the entrance. It lists the islands currently accepting exiles. The names feel ominous: Sado, Nijima, Hachige. You remember Hachige from earlier, it's the furthest, the bleakest. Think black volcanic soil and storms that chew through wooden shutters. It's the kind of place where wind is the only sound you can't silence. It was sometimes called the grave of the living. A man behind a desk reads aloud a name. The room doesn't react. The exiles simply stand, bow, and shuffle out. You realize something quietly heartbreaking. This process has been done so many times, it no longer feels human. But here's your fringe tidbit: some of those sent to remote islands actually rose to local fame. There are strange, half-forgotten tales of exiled samurai who became de facto leaders of their tiny island communities, repairing fishing nets, settling disputes, even forming poetry circles with fellow outcasts. Imagine that. You're cast out of society, and within months, you're organizing moon-viewing parties with rice balls and stolen sake. Still, for every romantic tale, there's a dozen colder ones. You walk out of the compound and pass a group of guards escorting a former court official. He's dressed too finely, as though he hasn't accepted his new reality. Around his neck, a thick straw rope, not tight, but unmistakable. Symbolic restraint. A public signal: this man no longer walks free, even if no chains bind him. You follow them, unnoticed, as they cross a low ridge toward the riverside. Waiting there is a boat, long, narrow, covered in a cloth canopy. It rocks gently in the river's lazy current. The official doesn't resist. He bows to the guards, steps into the boat, and sits. No dramatics, no farewells. That's part of the rule. Exile is quiet. You disappear without disrupting the harmony, and yet, harmony was often a myth. Historians still argue whether these exiles were truly political decisions or just strategic ways to eliminate competition. Some records describe offenses so vague, failure to reflect or absence of humility, that it's clear the system could be twisted for personal gain. You step back and lean against a damp post, watching the boat slip away. The river accepts it without question. And for a moment, you wonder how many of these men ever returned. Spoiler alert, very few. You head east again, deeper into the backstreets where another kind of punishment brews. These are not grand, noble exiles. These are the punishments handed out to low-ranking samurai who embarrassed their lords, brawled in the streets, or drank too heavily at a temple ceremony. The kind of petty, human slips that don't ruin dynasties, but can still cost you everything. You arrive at a practice yard, enclosed by slatted walls. At first glance, it's peaceful, an open space of packed dirt, bordered by planks. But at the center, there's a stone bench and a set of wooden stocks. These were used not just for criminals, but occasionally for disgraced samurai to endure public shaming rituals known as sokai. Here, they'd kneel for hours, sometimes days, in full view of commoners. Now imagine that. You, a person raised to be above reproach, made to kneel while merchants walk by, shaking their heads. Your old-school instructor sees you, sighs, and doesn't stop. Even worse, your kid cousin? She giggles. You sit in the shade, heart thudding softly in the quiet, as a young samurai is led to the stocks. His offense? Starting a fire during a drunken poetry reading. It's absurd, but the penalty is real. He kneels, hands resting on thighs, back perfectly straight, dignity peeled away, layer by layer, like dried rice paper in the rain. Eventually, you wander back into town, the sound of your footsteps drowned by the clamor of the marketplace. And you start to notice just how much Edo thrives on spectacle. The punishments aren't just about correction, they're theater. Carefully designed, choreographed performances meant to educate and intimidate. You buy a small rice ball, the vendor bowing low as he hands it to you. His eyes flick briefly to a wanted notice posted beside his stall, a charcoal sketch of a samurai who fled exile. A reward is offered. But not for his capture, oh no. For reporting the name of anyone who helped him escape. The thought creeps in, punishment wasn't always about guilt. Sometimes, it was about making sure everyone else stayed afraid, and that is a punishment in its own right. The rain starts just as you duck beneath the crooked eaves of an old tea house, the roof tiles above you clinking softly as water collects and spills over in miniature waterfalls. Edo isn't built for comfort during the rainy season, it's built for discipline. Still, there's something calming about watching the puddles form in the packed dirt alley. For a moment, it's easy to forget the strictness of life under the Tokugawa shogunate. But then you hear it, the wooden clatter of Jita sandals worn by a patrol. Not soldiers, exactly, these are Yoriki, mid-level magistrate assistants. They're not here to fight crime with flashing swords, they're here to enforce etiquette, collect confessions, and, when necessary, drag people toward their punishments like water flowing to the sea. One stops near you, adjusts the sleeves of his dark indigo robe, and pulls from his sash a paper slip. It's a warrant. The ink still fresh. Someone's about to have a very long afternoon. You follow them, of course. Because curiosity is stronger than sleepiness, they make their way toward the heart of the city and near the official court of the Machibugi, the town magistrate. It's here that the real drama unfolds. Crimes are judged. Punishments handed down. And sometimes, just sometimes, a samurai finds himself tangled in a web of accusations even his status can't cut through. You slip through the crowd just as a trial is beginning. Not the kind you know from modern courtroom dramas. This is more like a ceremony, equal parts kabuki and bureaucracy. The accused is a samurai of some modest house, accused of striking a monk during a festival. He claims the monk insulted his mother. The monk claims he was simply reciting a poem. You're watching the magistrate now, his face unreadable, but his hands moving swiftly. He sips tea, sets the cup down, then motions toward a clerk. The punishment? Temporary tsui, banishment from the capital for 6 months. No trial by jury. No appeal. Just judgment, fast and final. Mainstream historical fact incoming. Edo period magistrates often worked without what we'd call legal representation. You stood alone. Your testimony might count, or it might be ignored, especially if someone of higher rank decided your fate in advance. It was law, sure, but law with a very flexible spine. You glance at the punished samurai. He doesn't protest. Instead, he bows low. One full breath. Then turns and walks out of the court without looking back. That's the part that stays with you, the silence. As the courtyard empties, a whisper reaches your ear. Someone mutters a name. Then another. It seems today isn't just about one judgment, there's a list. You follow the whispers to a narrow hallway flanked with wooden tablets, each one etched with names and dates. These are the official records of kaiki, stripments. Not a word we use now, but devastating then. When a samurai committed a serious offense, he could be stripped of his title, income, weapons, and even his family name. You're not just removed, you're erased. Like a bad line in a calligraphy scroll, ink washed into oblivion. A small boy with ink-stained fingers is copying one such name onto a public register. His hands tremble, but he works quickly. The man he's writing about was once a castle accountant who misreported how much grain was held in storage. The result? Someone else starved, and the penalty was erasure. You wonder how many others starved before the report even reached Edo. But here's your quirky tidbit: some stripped samurai attempted to retrain themselves in other arts, calligraphy, basket weaving, even kabuki acting. Since they couldn't fight or teach anymore, they tried to survive by becoming artists. A few became famous. Most did not. One such man, known only as Jinkuro, became a haiku master whose poems were darker than a moonless alley. His most repeated line? A sword unsheathed cannot catch the wind. It's pinned to the wall here on a torn scroll. You read it twice. You get chills. The hallway leads into a larger room filled with confiscated items, armor sets, lacquered boxes, hairpins, tea sets. All once belonging to disgraced families. Everything neat, labeled, and for sale. It's like a shogunate-sanctioned garage sale of shame. You run your fingers along the hilt of a practiced blade, dulled and decorative. It once belonged to a teacher who pushed a student too hard during sparring. The boy lost an eye. The teacher lost everything. His entire school was shut down, his stipend revoked, his family relocated to a farming village in the north. Sometimes, justice in Edo had a long memory and a short fuse. You slip back outside, the rain thinning to a mist that clings to your sleeves. The wind smells of river and wet gravel. You walk toward a covered arcade near the merchant district, past entertainers and fortune sellers. One woman holds a painted fan and tells stories to a small crowd. But it's not a legend. It's a real tale about a samurai punished not for what he did, but for what he failed to do. The story: a provincial lord died suddenly. His loyal retainer, Shinsabu, was tasked with delivering the message to Edo. But along the road, he stopped to bury a stranger killed by bandits. Because of the delay, the shogunate deemed him unfit for his duties. Not cruel, but unfit. His punishment? He was reassigned as a stable boy under a false name, forbidden to reveal his identity or ever carry a sword again. The fan closes with a snap. The crowd exhales. You wonder how many times that story's been told, and how much of it is true. Edo, after all, blurs the line between fact and parable with every breath. By now, the lanterns are being lit. The sky turns the color of a bruised peach. You sit on a step, watching paper light sway in the breeze. Your thoughts linger on the punishments you've witnessed, the formal, the theatrical, the quiet ones that echo longest, and you realize something: in a world where honor is currency, disgrace isn't just a fine. It's an entire life sentence written in silence. Evening settles over Edo like a silk curtain, drawn gently across rooftops and alleyways. Lanterns flicker to life one by one, casting soft, honeyed light on damp stones and woven sandals. You're walking again, though now the air carries the smell of grilled fish, wood smoke, and the faint sweetness of plum wine. It would be almost cozy, if not for where you're going next. Tonight, your path turns toward a district few speak of aloud. You're heading into the world of internal samurai discipline, those secretive, behind the paper wall punishments enforced not by the city magistrates, but by the lords themselves. Clan matters, handled internally. Quiet, strict, and sometimes much crueler than any public spectacle. You pass through a modest gate into the walled residence of a mid-ranking daimyo. Not a great house, but respectable. Its gravel paths are raked clean, its lanterns tastefully plain. Here, reputation is everything. So what happens when a samurai embarrasses his house? When he drinks too much sake, loses a horse, or lets a thief slip past on guard duty, the answer: Ouchizume, a house arrest. Not some gentle timeout, but a structured, punishing isolation. You peer through a sliding door to see a small room barely large enough for a man to stretch his legs. Tatami floor, one futon, a chamber pot, a water jug, and a rice bowl. No inkstone. No paper. No sword. Here's your mainstream historical fact: Ouchizume could last from weeks to over a year, depending on the severity of the offense and the mood of the house elders. Offenders weren't permitted visitors, nor were they allowed to speak unless spoken to. Meals were sparse. The silence? Absolute. The man inside this cell-like room shifts slightly. He wears plain robes, no crest, no color. You've heard he insulted a senior during an archery contest, accused him of cheating in front of others. A mistake. Not because it was false, but because it was true. Still, truth didn't excuse rudeness. In samurai culture, obedience often outranked honesty. He catches your eye for a moment, then looks away. The shame sits on him heavier than his robes. You walk on, past rows of similar rooms. Some locked. Some open and empty. You can't help but wonder how many men left these walls changed, more humble, or more broken, then, just as you think this system couldn't get more suffocating. You reach a small courtyard at the back of the estate. Here, things escalate. This is the site for Heiasabaki, room trials. Essentially, internal hearings where a disgraced samurai is brought before his superior and given a final verdict. No audience. No drama. Just words, swords, and sometimes tears. Tonight, there's one such hearing. A young samurai kneels on a reed mat. His forehead touches the ground. Before him stands an elder, arms tucked into wide sleeves. Between them lies a sheathed short sword. The silence buzzes louder than a temple bell. Now here's your fringe tidbit. In some rare cases, the sword was symbolic. The samurai wouldn't be expected to use it, but its presence was a threat, a reminder that seppuku was always on the table. Even if unofficially. It wasn't forced, but it was encouraged. A kind of ritual guilt trip, samurai style. You lean against a cedar post, watching as the elder finally speaks. He announces the judgment: exile from the clan's inner circle. The samurai will lose his position, his stipend, and be reassigned to a remote border outpost. Not formal shimonagashi, but something eerily similar, what the clan euphemistically calls peripheral service. As the young man bows and rises to leave, you notice his sandals have already been removed. He leaves barefoot. That, you've learned, is the real mark of disgrace in this world, not chains or stocks, but silence and bare souls. You follow him out to the stables, where a single horse waits. It's old. Tired. Much like the new rider. As he mounts and rides out through the side gate, you're left wondering whether he'll ever see Edo again. Whether he even wants to. You step back into the corridor, but this time your gaze lands on something peculiar, a scroll hanging near the inner shrine. It lists the house's internal code, a mix of Confucian ethics and samurai expectations. One line jumps out at you. Honor, once dropped, soils everything it touches. Lovely. Soothing. Terrifying. As you move back toward the main gate, a senior retainer stops you. He offers a cup of tea, quietly, politely. You accept. As you sit together on the porch, he shares a hushed story about a samurai who once laughed during a funeral procession and was punished by being reassigned to the archives, forced to copy clan records by hand for 5 years. At first, the punishment seemed light. But within weeks, the samurai began to hallucinate names that weren't there, people erased from history. The endless ink, the silence, the names of the dead. He cracked, historians still argue whether this story is exaggerated for effect or rooted in truth. Some say the punishment was an allegory for ego. Others believe the archives were haunted. Either way, the lesson is the same. In Edo, even a chuckle could seal your fate. You finish your tea in silence, the warmth a small comfort against the cool night air. The retainer nods once, then stands. He walks off, disappearing into the gloom. You remain on the porch a while longer, listening to the soft sounds of night, the chirp of crickets, the distant shuffle of sandals, and the faintest echo of a reprimand spoken behind sliding doors. You rise and head back toward the main road. Around you, Edo continues to hum with life. But here, in the quiet spaces between punishment and redemption, you realize that the most chilling discipline isn't delivered with blade or branding. It's delivered with expectation, with silence, with the slow erosion of identity. As you turn the corner toward the sleeping town, you pass a wooden sign tucked discreetly into a wall. Its message, simple and perfect: those who forget their place shall find a smaller one. And suddenly, your steps feel just a little more careful. The lamps are lower now, their orange halos growing sleepy against the blackening sky. Your feet brush soft dust from the road as you move away from the clan residences and toward the outskirts of Edo proper. But your mind lingers behind. You keep replaying the image of that barefoot samurai disappearing into the dark. And with it, the idea that exile isn't always the removal from a place. Sometimes, it's the quiet stripping away of identity. Still, there's another form of exile that draws your attention now. A more literal one. You follow the scent of charcoal and river water to a checkpoint near the city edge. It's not a dramatic gate or fortress, just a modest structure of wood and paper screens, guarded by two men sipping weak tea. Beyond it lies the road to the provinces. And parked along that road is a small procession of wagons. Inside one wagon, beneath a top, you spot a figure wrapped in traveling robes. Not a criminal chained in disgrace, not exactly. This is a case of Karashi, exile with dignity. Kind of. The man inside the wagon once served as an advisor to a powerful Kyoto lord. But he made a mistake. He questioned the lord's spending habits in front of guests. Not rudely. Not even loudly. But the words landed like a pebble in the wrong pond. Ripples reached too far. And now, here he is, packed with a few belongings, bound for a distant estate on the edge of Hida province. You recognize the signs. This is soft exile. Not the kind with stocks and shame, but the quieter banishment that erased your social momentum. You were still technically samurai. Still allowed to wear your swords. But everyone knew. You'd been sent away. Like a broken heirloom hidden in the back of a drawer. Here's your mainstream historical fact. During the Edo period, samurai who committed errors in judgment, not crimes, were often exiled to the countryside instead of executed or imprisoned. It served two purposes. It preserved the clan's public image and removed troublesome personalities from political spaces. A reputation bandage, more than a punishment. But here's your quirky tidbit: some of those exiled samurai actually preferred rural life. Without the constant court rituals, politicking, and performance of Edo life, they were freer to write, farm, or just be left alone. One such man, Orokawa Tokuji, famously turned his exile into a calligraphy retreat and taught local children poetry. His work was rediscovered a century later, evidence that punishment, sometimes, becomes reinvention. The wagon creaks forward. The exiled man looks out at the city he's leaving. You're close enough to see that he's not sad, just resigned. Like someone letting go of an idea they didn't know they were holding on to. His eyes meet yours for a second. You nod. He nods back, then the procession moves on. You stay at the checkpoint a while longer. The guards tell you stories to pass the time. One leans in, whispering of a samurai who attempted to fake his own exile, paid a peasant to go in his place, complete with a forged letter and matching crest. The ruse was discovered within 2 days. The punishment? Public shaving of the top knot, and a forced pilgrimage on foot. No horse. No money. Just sandals and shame. They laugh at the memory, but one adds, more quietly, he never came back. You follow the road westward for a while, stepping out under open sky. Here, without the lanterns, the stars begin to emerge, distant, sharp, and quiet. This road has carried hundreds of men like the one you saw earlier. Some rode it only partway, bribed their way back into favor. Others kept walking, kept fading, and then there were the true Shimonagashi cases. Island exile. A phrase that feels romantic until you understand what it meant, men sentenced to remote islands off the Japanese coast. Not tropical paradises. Harsh, windy, salt-scarred places with little food and no return. The government used these islands like historical delete buttons, quiet. Final, and out of sight, you reach a small overlook and sit your back against a pine. From here, you can almost imagine the sea. Picture a small rowboat bumping against the shore, a single man stepping off onto rocky ground. No welcome. No guidance. Just a list of rules and a limited food ration. Historians still argue whether these island exiles were meant to be permanent. Some records show men returning after a decade. Others vanish completely. Did they die? Did they change their names and integrate with fishing villages? Did they build small shrines and leave behind stories carved into rock? Some say there's an island off Kyushu where exiled samurai built a miniature dojo and trained every morning at sunrise. That they believed exile didn't end the code, it refined it. That story might be true. Or it might be a legend whispered by those too afraid to follow their own duty to the end. The wind rustles the grass beside you. A cicada clicks in the brush. And just like that, you're back in Edo, mentally. At least, you return to the edge of town, passing merchants closing stalls, kids chasing a runaway sandal, and an old woman lighting incense at a street corner altar. She mutters a prayer. Perhaps for someone sent away. You're walking again. The streets are thinner now, the lanterns further apart. Shadows pool like ink between thatched fences and garden walls. Edo feels quieter here, less like a city, more like a memory of one. And this time, you're not chasing the official records. You're following gossip. Whispers. The kind of stories passed in low voices over tea, or behind a fan at a garden gathering, because now, you're stepping into the world of unspoken punishments. Not the kind with scrolls and verdicts. No judges, no records. Just consequences. Personal. Invisible. But very, very real. Let's start with this. Not all punishments came from above. Samurai society was layered, yes, but tightly knit. Your peers could hurt you worse than your lords ever did, because they knew exactly where to strike. Imagine this, you're a mid-level retainer. Not famous, not disgraced. Just a dependable cog in the Tokugawa machine. Then, one night at a poetry gathering, you make a careless joke. Something about your superior's poorly recited verse, funny, but too loud. The room heard. He heard, you don't get scolded. You don't get demoted. But 2 weeks later, your invitation to the New Year banquet doesn't arrive. Neither does the invite to the spring archery tournament. Your name disappears from the guest lists like it was never written. Colleagues stop dropping by. Your calls go unreturned. You've been socially exiled, what some Edo folks call the long silence. Here's your mainstream historical fact. Informal punishments like social exclusion were common, especially within tightly structured roles like court attendants or literary circles. Samurai life wasn't just war and duty, it was a constant negotiation of etiquette, patronage, and face-saving performances. Fail the script, and you were quietly removed from the stage. But here's your quirky tidbit, some samurai weaponized this social power like artists. A famous case involves a Kyoto poet-warrior who developed a complex ranking system of fan gestures at parties. One flick downward meant disapproval, 2 quick waves meant someone was to be forgotten. His network followed these signs obsessively. It was petty. It was brilliant. It ruined at least 3 careers. You stop at a small bridge over a narrow canal. The water glistens under the stars. You lean against the railing and picture one of those unlucky men, freshly uninvited from every gathering that mattered. Maybe he tried to write his way back in. Maybe he composed odes to lost friendship. Or tried to broker a reconciliation through mutual acquaintances. And maybe it never worked, because sometimes punishment wasn't about crime. It was about timing. Or tone. Or standing too close to someone else's scandal when it caught fire. In the distance, a temple bell rings once. You head toward the sound, into an older part of the city. The wooden buildings here have deeper eaves, more creaking steps. You arrive at a modest monastery, one of those places samurai were sometimes sent to reflect, yes, Inkyo. Technically, retirement. Spiritually, in forced obscurity, a soft glow spills from a paper lantern hung at the temple's front gate. You pass through and find a small garden inside. Raked gravel. Pine trees. A tiny pond with 3 koi, all pale as moonlight. And there, sitting cross-legged by the edge, is a man in monk's robes. But not a monk. Not really. You recognize the posture. The haircut. The way his hand still rests on an imaginary sword hilt that isn't there anymore. This man was once someone. A samurai. Maybe a general. Now, he's retired. A polite word. And a sign forgetting, here's the thing, not all exile required distance. Some was spatially tiny, but emotionally infinite. A man could be exiled right in the center of the city, just from relevance. You sit beside him without speaking. He doesn't look at you. Instead, he murmurs softly, almost to himself, about plum trees. How they blossom earliest. How their petals fall even before the frost is done. Then he adds, I used to serve a man who mistook noise for loyalty. A long pause. He has many loud friends now. You let the silence stretch, and in it, you realize something important. Punishment in Edo-Era Japan wasn't always imposed to fix behavior. Sometimes, it was simply a tool to thin the crowd. Keep the court clean. Or quiet, you leave him there, still watching the koi, and return to the outer city wall. A few paces later, you pass a shop selling writing brushes and inkstones. The shopkeeper is just locking up, but you catch sight of a calligraphy scroll in the window. The characters read, even a crow in white robes remains a crow. You smile. Maybe bitterly, one more thought creeps in as you move on. Some samurai weren't punished by anyone else. They punished themselves. Not with blades or banishment, but with retreat. Voluntary exile. Disappearance. Historians now try to trace some of these men, samurai who handed in their swords, changed their names, moved to small villages to become teachers, fishermen, herbalists. One even re-emerged decades later as a sake brewer, using war poetry on his labels. He claimed he'd never wielded a blade, though his calligraphy told otherwise. The question still haunts scholars, did they run? Or did they escape? Historians still argue whether these quiet exits were acts of dishonor or the last noble resistance to a corrupt system. Some call them cowards. Others see monks in disguise. You round the corner into a quiet cul-de-sac, and there's nothing left now but cats and night flowers and the faint crunch of gravel underfoot. You breathe in. The air smells like bamboo and distant miso. Everything has stilled. And so you pause, letting the thoughts settle. Punishment in Edo wasn't always visible. Sometimes it came without a word, without a scroll, without a guard. Just a shift. A silence. A shadow that stretched a little further than yesterday. You look up at the stars, which refuse to judge you. Unlike Edo. You wake, if you ever really slept, beneath the echo of temple bells and the soft clatter of a morning cart. Edo is yawning now, unfurling its narrow alleys and wafting miso smoke through its many-storied lungs. But instead of heading back toward the bustling merchant quarters or the polished courtyards of daimyo estates, you slip into a less discussed layer of samurai life, the waiting rooms, not literal rooms. Figurative ones. Entire lives spent waiting for a verdict, a pardon, a call back to service that might never come. Today, you're visiting one of these lives. You find him in a backlot townhouse. A small square of mossy yard, rain gutter choked with leaves, paper screens yellowed from years of quiet disuse. He doesn't answer your knock right away. He's in no rush. Why would he be when the door slides open? He regards you with eyes too clear for someone this invisible. This is a disgraced retainer's district. Not prison. Not exile. Just a place where men go to be forgotten properly. He's one of many samurai caught in administrative limbo. He hasn't committed a crime. But a lord under whom he served has fallen from power. A cousin got tangled in a bribery case. A letter he didn't write bore his family crest. So now, here he waits, you step inside. His room is spare, tatami mats, a scroll of a weeping willow, and a small lacquered box containing 2 swords that haven't seen light in years. He offers you tea. Bitter. Slightly burnt. Here's your mainstream historical fact. Samurai dismissed from service often weren't punished through official exile but through social dormancy. They were expected to quietly retreat, subsist on dwindling stipends, and await either death or a possible recall to duty. Rare, but not impossible. There's even a word for these men, RNN. Most people think of them as sword-wielding wanderers, but many RNN never wandered at all. They just lingered. Like echoes in the bureaucracy. Now for your quirky tidbit, some of these waiting samurai found work in the unlikeliest places. One famous case involves a man who, unable to secure new patronage, became a professional listener, paid to attend merchant gatherings and nod thoughtfully. Not to speak. Just to appear solemn and samurai-like. His presence apparently added gravitas to business deals. By the end of his life, he owned 3 tea shops. You glance around the room again and notice something curious, a ledger. Not of accounts, but of apologies. Hundreds of them. Written by the man himself, addressed to people you assume he's never dared contact. Former allies. Distant relatives. Even his own sons. It's a ritual. Every morning, he writes a fresh apology. Not to be sent. Just to be real, there's one letter you notice with fresh ink. It reads, "To the Lord I failed to contradict. I am sorry I agreed." You don't ask. Instead, you step back into the street and walk past others like him, middle-aged, unshaven men tending bonsai or feeding alley cats, dressed just slightly too well to be mistaken for commoners, yet no longer truly samurai in practice. They are suspended, punished by the absence of duty. By the waiting, some of them, desperate to escape the purgatory, chose to self-exile. They would stage elaborate departures, leaving their family crests behind, burning old correspondence, and heading into the interior provinces to assume new names. One famous samurai, Genzabai, faked his own death by floating a robe and sandals down the river, then lived for 20 years as a kabuki scriptwriter under the name Snow Moth. His plays are still staged. Most don't know who he really was, others weren't so lucky. You pause at a small shrine on the edge of the district. Tucked beneath its eaves are dozens of wooden prayer plaques, but none bear names. Only symbols, broken swords, wilting flowers, hollow fans. You understand now. These weren't offerings to gods. They were anonymous confessions. Symbols left by men who couldn't speak their stories aloud. Punishment, when not given form, demands ritual. A boy runs past you, laughing, and your mind flashes to another aspect of this long waiting, the children of disgraced samurai. They bore the shame too. Not through punishment, but omission. Barred from certain schools. Excluded from matches. Sometimes renamed entirely to obscure the link. The punishment leaked forward in time, You overhear a fragment of conversation from a rice shop nearby. His uncle was exiled, you know. The polite kind. Still, not someone to trust. The voice trails off as the speaker disappears into a doorway. But it hangs in the air like smoke. You realize how easily punishment persisted, not through written edict but whispered context, and yet, not everyone accepted their fate. Some of these are in grew tired of waiting. They sought to reclaim their status through action. Violence, even. This is where the term karmic akushi, spirit disappearance, begins to flicker in conversation. Men vanishing from waiting districts and reappearing as masked enforcers in distant provinces. Not sanctioned. Not legal. Just desperate to feel useful again. A ghost story? Maybe. Or maybe a rebellion beneath the surface. Not all punishments stay in their boxes. You make your way toward a river path as the sun rises higher. The light now is soft gold, filtering through high clouds like brushed silk. A fisherman waves from a dock. A girl draws water with a pail too large for her arms. Edo is moving again. But you can't help thinking of the men who are not, still sitting. Still writing. Still waiting for a verdict that may never come, and in that realization, something crystallizes. Exile, in all its forms, official, social, spiritual, isn't always about being sent away. Sometimes, it's about being made to wait until even you forget what you were waiting for. You don't mean to end up here. You follow a stone path down a slope, thinking it might lead to a tea house, or at least a bench with a view, but instead, you find something far stranger, a gate. Not grand. Just two weathered posts with a faded sign hanging crookedly above it. The characters are barely legible, but you squint and sound them out. House of Regretful Shadows. Sounds like something out of a ghost tale, right, but you step through, because of course you do. Inside is a courtyard ringed with sliding doors. A few elderly men and women shuffle about, tending moss gardens and adjusting wind chimes. A woman in pale grey robes approaches you with a soft bow. She speaks in a whisper, welcome. This is where those who refused orders now live. You pause, unsure what you're hearing. Refused orders? As in? Samurai who disobeyed, she nods, reading your face. They weren't executed. They weren't imprisoned. Their punishment is simply being here. This is a place for the disobedient not quite condemned. A shadow retirement village. A holding bay for insubordinate samurai who broke rules in ways too ambiguous for immediate execution, yet too scandalous for return to service. One man once refused to strike a child thief. Another turned his blade away from a lord's drunken orders. One reportedly destroyed important correspondence to protect the honor of a courtesan, officially. Their actions disrupted the order. Unofficially, they were punished for inconvenient decency. Here's your mainstream historical fact: the Edo period had few mechanisms for ethically-driven disobedience. Honor meant obedience, even when commands bordered on madness. A samurai who defied orders was expected to take his own life immediately, or be forced to. But in rare cases, lords spared these men and tucked them away where they could do no more damage. Now the quirky twist: these compounds became known in hushed circles as Yurei Yashiki, ghost houses. Not because they were haunted, but because the people inside had effectively died, socially speaking. They weren't on clan rolls. They couldn't participate in temple records. They had no official family names. They were shadows. Living ghosts, and you're walking among them now. The woman leads you through the compound. It's peaceful. Disturbingly so. There's a garden pond with absurdly symmetrical rocks, and an area where the residents practice archery with unstrung bows. She points out an elderly man arranging flower petals on a tray. He once held a castle for 4 days alone. She says, then surrendered it rather than burn the villagers inside. Coward, the shogunate called him. Hero, the villagers whispered. Now, he arranges petals. You wonder what other quiet rebellions live behind these sliding screens. A samurai who forgave a debt too generously. another who refused to punish a friend, one who lied to protect a merchant family from unfair seizure, and always the same ending: not death, not exile, not prison. Just disappearance. But within society, a kind of internal exile. Like being in the same house with everyone, but no one looking at you. She takes you to a small library, more like a record room. Shelves of handwritten scrolls, all undated, untitled. Just names, some inked with shaking hands, some boldly. She explains, these are confessions. Or maybe declarations. No one reads them. They're not archived. They simply exist, because the writers do. A few still write each day. You pick one at random and unroll it a bit. I was told to cut the throat of a pregnant spy. I did not. She lived. I am still watching the road, wondering if she will return to kill me. I would let her. You roll it back up gently. You ask if these people ever leave. Some try, she says. But they usually return. Or vanish altogether. One of them, an elderly swordsman with clouded eyes, sits by a ginkgo tree, offering silent prayers to the falling leaves. You sit beside him, not speaking. He hands you a small carved figure. It's a fox. Trickster, guardian, or both. You're not sure. There's a breeze, finally. The smell of damp bark, ashes, and incense. You ask the woman, finally, why they aren't executed if their crimes were so bad. She answers slowly, because their deaths would have raised too many questions. Too many sympathies. And because they didn't fail. They just refused. That word, refused, it's weightier now. It lingers in your chest. You start to leave, but the woman stops you. Most never come here twice. She says. Not because they aren't allowed, but because once you've seen this much quiet regret, it's hard to hear normal noise again. You bow deeply before leaving the compound. The gate swings shut behind you with an almost imperceptible sigh. You walk for a while without direction, letting the street noises bleed back into your ears. The rumble of merchant carts. A street performer shouting haiku. Children chasing a hoop. But behind it all, you still hear the wind chimes from that strange house, clinking slowly, like time being measured in almost forgotten principles. And maybe that's the real punishment, isn't it, to be mostly right? In a system that needs you to be completely obedient. You've walked long enough now that your sandals feel thin beneath your feet. Edo's dust clings to your hem, and there's a dull throb at the base of your spine, not from anything in particular, just the cumulative weight of unspoken stories. You don't mean to end up at the edge of the city. Yet here you are. A border town of sorts, not a proper gate, but a spiritual and social threshold. Beyond this winding path lie the true exiles. The ones not tucked into tidy rooms or ghost houses. These are the banished beyond recall. You see a wooden placard nailed to a tree, cracked and sun-faded. The inscription is hard to read, but one phrase remains sharp: out of sight, out of order. Out here, you're stepping into the margins of the shogunate script. There's no ceremony for these banishments. No dramatic send-offs with scrolls and guards. Usually, just a muttered verdict and a nudge toward a trailhead. These were often the fates of minor samurai who disrupted the delicate mechanics of Edo's bureaucracy. Not dangerous enough to execute. Not famous enough to imprison. But definitely inconvenient. Your mainstream historical fact for today: Edo-era banishment zones were very real. Entire remote provinces served as informal dumping grounds for problematic samurai and bureaucrats. Sado Island, for instance, once a gold mine site, was used to exile criminals, dissidents. And yes, unlucky samurai who failed to toe the line. The land was fertile. The sea, harsh. And the loneliness, legendary. But here's the thing, historians still argue whether these remote assignments were meant purely as punishment, or if, in some twisted logic, they were intended as a final test of virtue. Could a samurai, stripped of all structure, still live with honor? It's a spicy little scholarly debate, punishment or purification. You pass a roadside shrine built entirely of driftwood. A heap of pebbles rests at its base. Travelers leave 1 stone for each year of exile survived. Some piles are startlingly tall. You come across a man wearing a sun-faded hari and wide straw hat. His left arm ends just below the elbow, a clean cut, old. His sandals are mismatched. He's singing softly while grinding bark into a powder with a wooden pestle. He glances up, eyes crinkling. "Visitor?" he asks, like it's a question he hasn't had to use in a while. You nod. He gestures for you to sit beside him. He offers tea, again with a burnt flavor. You're starting to think it's a theme. This man, it turns out, used to be a scribe for a minor daimyo. He altered a land survey to spare a village from unfair taxation. His lord found out. Too clever by half, he chuckles. That was 30 years ago. Now, he makes herbal salves for travelers who pass this way, mostly monks and bandits. Sometimes government messengers drop notes for other exiles under a loose stone by his hut. It's like a post office, he says, but for people nobody admits still exist. You ask him if he regrets what he did. He shrugs. Depends on the day. Some mornings I remember the smell of lacquer ink. Other days, I'm just glad I can still walk. There's a silence between you. Then he adds, but I never beg to return. That counts for something. You nod. Here comes your quirky tidbit. Certain exile communities developed their own miniature governments. On Sado Island, a group of exiled samurai once held clandestine poetry contests and enforced curfews, completely unofficial, of course. But their little government reportedly ran more smoothly than the local daimyos. When a visiting official saw it in action, he quietly ordered that no one interfere. Let the outcasts manage themselves, he supposedly said. They seem better at it. It's oddly comforting, this idea. That even stripped of armor, title, and context, some samurai couldn't help but build a structure out of dust. The man walks you to a split in the road. One path curves toward a weather-warped temple. The other disappears into a forest so thick it almost swallows light. Some never stop walking, he says. They think if they go far enough, the punishment will wear off. You ask him if it does. He looks down the forest path, thoughtful. I think, the further you go, the more you carry it with you. Like an echo in your ribs. You part ways quietly. No bow. Just mutual awareness. A few miles on, you see another exile camp. This one is newer. You can tell by the fresh-cut wooden patchwork roofs. 3 men sit around a pot of stew. A woman sharpens a hone nearby. There are children here, quiet, wary ones. Their parents greet you, but never ask your name. That's how it works out here. Names have too much gravity. One man points to a pile of writing slate stacked beside the fire. Records, he says, of who passed through. We don't know who'll ever read them. But it feels wrong not to leave something behind. You ask what crimes they committed. One says, spoke too loudly. Another shrugs. A third simply says, wrong side of the banquet table. Their laughter is tired, but not bitter. They offer you a bowl of stew. It's thin, but warm. The kind of meal that lingers longer in memory than in your belly. You wonder, as night begins to settle, whether the shogunate truly understood the punishment it was dishing out. Whether they imagined these quiet lives blooming at the edges of maps. Or whether they thought these men and women would simply vanish into shame. But they didn't vanish, they adapted. You pass one last marker as you prepare to head back. A tree with hundreds of tiny cloth flags tied to its branches. Each bears a word or symbol stitched in thread, small, defiant messages from the nameless to the invisible. You don't tie one. But you touch a branch as you pass, and it feels like acknowledgement. You return to Edo like a ghost slipping back into a mask, quiet, unnoticed, and carrying more than you left with. The city buzzes on, blissfully unaware of its outcasts flung to the margins. People haggle over fish, chase wayward chickens, and laugh at bawdy kabuki parodies. But you've seen the edges now. And once you've walked among the discarded, you can't help but notice who else is teetering on that brink. You find yourself in a narrow alley, the kind that snakes behind shrines and merchant stalls. Here, tucked between a fish smoker and a laundry house, is a wooden sign carved with a single kanji, to wait. You knock. Once. Twice. A peephole opens, stares. Then clicks shut. A moment later, the door creaks inward. Inside is a room lit only by paper lanterns. Men kneel in a circle. No one speaks. Their faces are calm, unreadable. A woman in a formal kimono offers you a cushion. She whispers, "We are the waiting." These are samurai not quite exiled, but not quite accepted either, suspended in bureaucratic limbo. Some are under investigation. Others disgraced but not yet dismissed. They live as if exiled, but on paper? Still technically employed. A samurai version of pending, your mainstream historical fact here, the Edo period's rigid bureaucracy often created long, uncomfortable pauses between accusation and punishment. Samurai suspected of corruption, misconduct, or failure might wait months or years for official judgment. During this time, they were forbidden to work, draw stipends, or leave their districts, but they also weren't told to go. These shadow samurai waited. And waited. Hence the nickname Imachibushi, waiting warriors. Now for the quirky angle, some of these Machibushi formed clubs. Secret salons. They met at odd hours, sharing rumors and riddles. They even developed coded poetry styles, where each line hinted at their bureaucratic purgatory. One popular form replaced seasonal words with office jargon. A haiku might read, "Autumn leaves file down, paper screens echo silence, the ink pot still waits, ridiculous." Completely. Comforting? Definitely. Tonight, you sit among them. No one explains the rules. There's no ceremony. Just shared stillness. One man slowly refills a teacup without drinking. Another traces imaginary shapes on the floor. Then a younger samurai speaks. "This week, I received a summons," he says softly. The others bow slightly. Not in congratulations, but solidarity. His time of waiting has ended. What follows? No one asks. It could be reinstatement. It could be seppuku. That's not the point. The point is, the uncertainty is over. You're ushered out quietly. The door closes behind you with a sigh. Like lungs finally exhaling. You look back at the kanji on the door again, to wait. Somehow heavier now, as you wander again, the city seems filled with invisible borders. Not just between districts or classes, but between certainty and silence. You pass a man in formal robes sweeping a stoop. He moves too precisely to be a servant. Too gracefully to be untrained. You wonder if he's another Machibushi, waiting out his fate by pretending he has won. Down another alley, you find a makeshift archery range in a burnt-out garden. The targets aren't circles, they're official-looking seals drawn on rice paper. A group of middle-aged samurai take turns shooting at them, laughing softly. You ask one what they're doing, practicing dismissal. He jokes, it's a coping ritual, you realize. They're literally targeting the symbols of the system that forgot them, and here's the whisper-level truth: the longer someone waits without direction, the more their sense of identity rewrites itself. These samurai, kept in suspension too long, began drifting from the Bushido code not with rebellion, but with boredom. And from boredom comes mockery, and from mockery, tiny revolutions. Some stopped shaving their heads in the prescribed tonsure. Some stopped writing in formal script. One group even started training left-handed, scandalous, in a culture obsessed with right-sided precision. Historians don't like this part. It muddies the waters. The Bushido ideal wasn't supposed to include satirical haiku and left-handed duels. But here's your callback: remember those outcasts in the exile zones, setting up micro-governments and secret message drops. It's not so different here. Disillusioned people will always build systems, even if only to amuse themselves. You pause near a tiny noodle shop. There's a framed notice beside the door. Faded ink, but you can just make out the stamp of the bakufu. It's an official demotion notice, for a clerk named Ito. Nothing dramatic. Just a line, due to clerical negligence, position suspended indefinitely. You peer inside. The cook waves cheerfully. "Try the miso," he calls. "No poison today." You laugh. But then you realize, that's Ito, he kept the notice. Framed it. Started a noodle shop under it. You sit at the counter. "The miso's incredible," he says. "Lost my title. Found my talent." You ask if he misses the samurai life. He shakes his head. "I was never good at taking orders. But I'm great with ladles." The guy beside you, graying, broad-shouldered, leans in. "I used to be his superior. Demoted too. I'm the dishwasher now." And they both laugh. There's no bitterness. Just a shared joke, sipped through steam and broth. Outside, the city carries on. Children chase kites. A bell rings far off. But you sit a while longer, sipping miso, thinking about everyone in this vast city who's technically still waiting. It's not exile. It's not disgrace. It's the gray space in between. The pause where identity reshapes. Where dignity either dissolves or adapts, and most surprisingly, some people seem to prefer it that way. The sun dips lower, painting Edo's rooftops with a wash of molten gold, but your feet carry you deeper into the city's quieter quarters, where lanterns flicker like fireflies caught in the dim. Here, away from the clatter of merchants and the roar of kabuki theaters, is where you find the samurai who faced a punishment even more peculiar than exile, the ritual disgrace of harakiri orders without the honor. Imagine being a samurai, already branded a failure by your peers and lord, yet instead of a swift, honorable death by seppuku, you are condemned to a slow death by societal ostracism. No swords, no ceremonies, just invisible chains tightening with every passing day. You become what the Japanese called a zangsho, a penitent who could not cleanse his honor through the blade. Your mainstream historical fact, while seppuku was the prescribed method for samurai to restore lost honor, not all disgraced warriors were allowed this. The shogunate sometimes imposed a more humiliating punishment, denial of the right to commit seppuku. This forced them into a limbo where dishonor festered without the solace of ritual death. This form of punishment was particularly used when a samurai's crime was political embarrassment or failure rather than outright treason or murder. They weren't executed, but they were socially exiled within their own class. The irony? They were more despised than those who died with a sword in hand. Now for the quirky detail, some disgraced samurai would adopt bizarre survival strategies. One such man took to walking backwards in public, claiming it was a way to reverse the tide of shame. Others grew their hair long and wild, turning themselves into eccentric hermits who haunted Edo's parks, reciting poetry no one understood. One infamous story tells of a samurai who tattooed his face with swirling clouds, declaring he was masked by shame. He would perform impromptu theatrical plays on street corners, mocking the samurai code itself. Crowds flocked to see the shame mask, but officials saw him as a dangerous mocker of authority. And here's an open scholarly debate for you. Historians still argue whether denying the right to seppuku was a deliberate tactic to prolong suffering or an unintentional consequence of bureaucratic rigidity. Some say it was meant as a psychological torment far worse than death. Others think it reflected inconsistent judicial practices rather than cruel design, as the shadows lengthen. You sense the weight of these punishments, not just physical, but existential. Imagine living day after day in a world where your only crime was failing to meet impossible standards, and the system denies you even the mercy of an honorable death. You stumble upon a faded diary tucked beneath a loose floorboard in an abandoned samurai house. Its brittle pages reveal the thoughts of one such zangsho who wrote about his slow unraveling. "Each morning, I dress not in armor but in shame," he penned. "The sword sleeps in its sheath, mocking my uselessness. But despite this, the diary ends on a surprising note, yet the dawn always breaks, and with it, a chance to live another day in this strange exile. That strange exile, shame without release, is perhaps one of the quietest punishments of the Edo-Era. You walk on, the city's murmurs fading as night folds around you like a kimono. Somewhere far off, a flute plays a haunting melody, a lament for the lost honor, the waiting, the exile, and you realize the samurai's world was never just about swords and battles. It was about survival in many forms. Sometimes that survival meant facing the world's judgment without the chance for redemption. You blink, feeling the gentle pull of sleep tugging at your lids. The stories of these men and women, their punishments, their strange rituals, linger like smoke, curling around your mind. But don't worry. You're safe here. As the city's pulse slows and the soft rustling of paper lanterns becomes the soundtrack to your wandering, you drift toward a lesser-known aspect of Edo's justice system that often escapes notice, the curious punishment of kaeki, samurai sent to forced labor camps disguised as artisans and farmers. Yes, the shogunate's exile system wasn't always about isolation or public shame. Sometimes, it was about erasing a samurai's identity altogether by making him live as a commoner, a man who had to work the soil or master a craft to survive. Imagine the horror for a proud samurai, born into a warrior class and suddenly assigned to wield a hoe instead of a katana, your mainstream historical fact, from the mid-Edo period onward. Certain disgraced samurai were ordered to live in remote villages where they were assigned roles like potters, blacksmiths, or even farmers. This wasn't a voluntary transition but a legal punishment aimed at stripping them of status and forcing humility. The shogunate's records show entire groups of ex-samurai working side by side with peasants, often under watchful eyes. Here's a quirky tidbit for you. Some of these samurai, despite their forced new lives, left subtle marks of their former identity. For example, a pottery shard from the 18th century was found with an embossed family crest, something peasants wouldn't dare replicate. Archaeologists believe this was a quiet act of rebellion. A samurai's way of saying, "I am still here." You wander through an old village where the streets still follow the pattern of samurai settlements. Weathered signboards once bearing proud crests now hang empty, worn by time. You catch a glimpse of a blacksmith's hammer ringing in a distant workshop, but the rhythm feels off, not the sharp, deliberate strike of a warrior, but the steady, repetitive labor of a craftsman. The villagers are polite but reserved. You overhear snippets of conversations, fragments of past glories mingled with the hard realities of daily toil. Some elders recount tales of ancestors who once bore swords but were forced to till fields after falling out of favor. Now, an open scholarly debate. Historians still argue whether this forced assimilation was a form of social control meant to prevent unrest by dissolving samurai identity or a pragmatic move by the shogunate to utilize skilled but disgraced warriors for economic benefit. Was it punishment or just a way to recycle manpower? You stop by a weather-beaten shrine on the village edge. A small plaque reads, "In memory of those who wore the sword and the plough." It's a quiet tribute, one that feels both reverent and resigned. Walking further, you notice subtle remnants of samurai culture woven into everyday life, patterns in woven cloth, unique farm tools fashioned with precise care, and the occasional poetry inscription hidden beneath house eaves. It's as if these samurai, stripped of title and rank, carried their heritage like a secret flame, quiet but unextinguished. You reflect on the paradox of forced labor as punishment. On one hand, it's a denial of identity and honor. On the other, it's a strange preservation of skill and pride in a new form. As twilight deepens, the village's silhouette softens. Lanterns glow warmly, and distant laughter echoes from a small festival. The samurai-turned-potter's son spins clay on a wheel, his hand steady, his eyes calm. Somewhere beneath his calm lies a history of exile, endurance, and adaptation. You realize that punishment in Edo wasn't always about breaking someone down. Sometimes, it was about rebuilding, though in unfamiliar shapes, and as you step away from the village, the weight of these layered lives stays with you, like the imprint of a faded family crest on a shard of ancient pottery. The night thickens and your footsteps carry you toward one of Edo's more obscure, almost forgotten punishments, the forced pilgrimage of disgraced samurai to sacred shrines, intended as a path to redemption, or permanent exile disguised as spiritual cleansing. You imagine walking miles along narrow, dusty roads, each step a slow penance. Your feet ache, the wind whispers secrets through pine needles, and with every shrine you pass, you carry not just your pack but the weight of your dishina. Mainstream fact, pilgrimages to sacred sites were common religious acts in Edo, Japan, but for samurai, forced pilgrimages were sometimes imposed as punishments for moral failings or political offenses. The journey was both penance and public spectacle, often lasting weeks or months. It was a way to remove disgraced samurai from their homes, forcing them to seek spiritual absolution while keeping them under surveillance. The quirky side? Some disgraced samurai turned their punishment into a kind of theatrical performance art. They wore patched robes and carried wooden swords, reciting poetry loudly at roadside inns, often making ironic comments about their situation. These pilgrim performers became minor celebrities in rural villages, blending tragedy and comedy. One even started a cult-like following, attracting curious peasants who mistook his sham penance for genuine enlightenment. Now, historians still argue whether these pilgrimages truly provided spiritual cleansing or were merely a form of social control disguised as religious duty. Was the intent penitence, humiliation, or exile? Probably all three. You follow the old pilgrimage route to the famed TSHG shrine, its gates towering and its grounds shimmering in moonlight. Along the way, you pass wooden plaques left by pilgrims, many bearing names of samurai with smudged ink, prayers for forgiveness, and sometimes bitter curses. You stop at a humble inn, where an elderly innkeeper shares stories of a samurai who returned from pilgrimage years later, claiming he'd met spirits who judged him more kindly than men had. Some say the man regained favor, others whisper he lost his mind. Outside, the cicadas drone a rhythmic chant, and you realize the pilgrimage was more than physical. It was a liminal passage, a journey through shame, faith, and hope. And as you rest your head tonight, consider this: sometimes exile isn't about walls or distance, it's about walking a path so long and uncertain that you lose yourself in the journey. You drift into a dimly lit gallery beside the Sumida River, where lantern reflections flicker against polished wood floors and faint echoes of street life drift in through open SG screens. The room is quiet, but the walls speak volumes, too many for you to take in at once. Obvious at first are the vivid woodblock prints, each depicting a different punishment scene: a samurai bound to a stake, jeering crowds, even a magistrate's clerk wielding a bamboo paddle with theatrical flourish. You feel a chill thread through your spine, but you also detect something else, a wry grin hidden within the shadows of ink and color. Think back to earlier sections, when punishments unfolded with solemn ritual or silent exile. Now, here they're immortalized by artists, kabuki actors, and haiku poets, midwives of collective memory that turned grisly spectacles into enduring cultural touchstones. In this place, you realize how art both preserves and transforms the weight of shame. You step closer to a print by Utaga Kunioshi, dated to the early 1800s. The scene shows a hapless samurai up against a wooden pillar, being beaten by an official whose face, oddly cartoonish, wears a sly grin. The onlookers point and laugh, and a monkey perched on a nearby tree seems to mimic the magistrate's gestures. Quirky, yes, but not merely playful. This print reveals how artists sometimes exaggerated punishment scenes to critique or lampoon authority, an early form of social commentary hidden in plain sight. Here's your mainstream historical fact: by the late Edo period, ukiyo-e artists regularly depicted sensational criminal cases and punishments, both because those scenes sold well and because they reflected a fascination with justice and disorder among commoners. You move on to a set of kabuki performance sketches, each one capturing frozen moments of dramatic irony. One play, Taku Etsu no Suji, features a scene where a condemned samurai, moments away from being branded, breaks into an absurdly silly song about his favorite childhood mischief. The lyric spills into the margin: kids once tied ikai to willow trees, now the magistrate ties a man to fate. You almost smile. It's bizarre to imagine a samurai belting out tunes in a punishment scene, but kabuki was never subtle. Performers donned exaggerated makeup and costumes, turning even the harshest sentences into a sort of dark comedy. Here's a quirky tidbit: fringe records mention an actor who insisted on wearing a pig snout mask during a punishment scene to mock judicial greed, though some say that anecdote is pure theater gossip. Perhaps invented by playwrights to deepen the legend, you skirt around to a small alcove where several haiku scrolls hang, each offering condensed verse that evokes both empathy and irony. One reads, "Curtain lifts on shame, rice bowl shattered on the floor, a laugh through the cringe." Another goes, "Bamboo paddle strikes, moonlight glints on straw sandals, tomorrow, new jest." Haiku masters often wrote about punishment scenes as a way to capture fleeting human folly, folding complex emotions into 17 syllables. Some of these poems were composed on the spot after witnessing a public flogging, others reworked older verses once a case became legendary. Here's a mainstream fact: by the mid-Edo period, punishment-themed haiku had become common in poetry circles, reflecting a cultural blend of moral instruction and gallows humor. You notice how some of the poets deliberately played with seasonal imagery. Bamboo paddle strikes in winter evokes chill, while rice bowls shattered in autumn hints at harvest lost. Each line is layered, revealing social critique beneath a veneer of nature. You drift across the room to a display of folding screens, baibu, illustrating monthly scenes of punishments. January's panel shows a thief caged and surrounded by pleasantries, courtiers sipping tea and offering polite bows while spectators lean in, eager for gossip. February's panel, by contrast, depicts a high-ranking samurai performing seppuku in the snow, a scene so stark it almost freezes the color from the screen. What strikes you is the progression. As the screens move through the year, punishments shift from petty theft to political betrayal, echoing the changing seasons and shifting tides of public interest. Quirky details abound. A cat peeks from behind a guard, a teacup wobbles mid-hand. As though the painter wanted you to catch life's absurd persistence in the face of sorrow. In the corner, a few visitors murmur so softly you can hardly hear them, tracing their fingers along the gilded edges. One points out a hidden signature, an obscure artist who went by a pseudonym, rumored to have secretly been a magistrate himself. They say he painted these scenes at night, out of both fascination and guilt. Fringe scholars claim that his brushstrokes sometimes match calligraphy found in sentencing records, suggesting he was literally writing judgment with both ink and paint. Historians still argue whether this artist's identity was a deliberate critique of corruption or merely a convenient legend to boost sales. You lean against the polished wood rail, folding your arms, and remember earlier sections, those faces kneeling in shame, those silent exiles waiting in hush, those phantom punishments among the shadows. Here, in these artistic renderings, everything is amplified: the laughter, the horror, the absurdity. Punishment becomes spectacle, just as it was in life, but through art, it transcends immediate pain and becomes a narrative thread that wends through generations. One last piece catches your eye: a lacquered box filled with painted wooden dolls, each representing a specific offender from Edo history. The samurai among them wear painted faces twisted in shock or defiance, peasants hunch in fear, merchants clutch coin purses they've been fined for. There's a playful eeriness to these dolls, like a macabre board game where each piece is a cautionary tale. You learn that these dolls were once lent out to traveling storytellers, who would use them to animate tales in villages far from Edo, ensuring that news of punishments and the moral lessons they carried traveled even to places where official edicts might not reach. That, for you, is perhaps the quirkiest tidbit of all: punishment stories as caravan entertainment. Spreading smiles and shudders in equal measure, you step back from the display and feel the gallery's hush embrace you one last time. It strikes you that, through these creative reflections, punishment scenes have been woven into the cultural fabric, shaping how Edoans, and now you, remember justice and shame. In every brushstroke, every masked actor's line, every clipped verse, there's a dialogue between society's need to punish and its need to laugh, to learn, to move on. You turn to leave, but the memory of a final haiku lingers in the silence between ticking lanterns. Crimson ink flows cold, yet in jest, we find our truth. Echoes warm the night. The gallery door slides closed behind you with a gentle sigh, as though releasing a breath withheld. Outside, the river murmurs under moonlight, carrying the echoes of art, laughter, and punishment into the night. The night deepens now, and your thoughts slow to a gentle swirl. Imagine the lantern's glow softening, their light pooling like warm tea in the darkness. You feel the air hush around you, as though the city itself has paused to let your mind rest. The stories of inked punishments and painted faces drift toward the edges of awareness, becoming wisps of memory rather than sharp realities. Imagine your eyelids growing heavy with each passing breath, the dust of Edo settling onto your shoulders like a silken weight. In these final moments, let the harsh edges of public shame soften into quiet reflection. Remember the hush of in writing apologies in empty rooms, the sigh of petitioners waiting outside closed gates. The soft click of Jita on stone as exiled samurai walk toward distant shores. Each memory now dims into a gentle cadence, like the soft rhythm of distant drums or the echo of a poem recited long ago. Feel the tension leave your jaw, letting it relax so that the smallest noise, a cicada's whisper, the sigh of a paper screen, becomes a lullaby. The flicker of distant lanterns is your gentle guide, steering you away from the weight of historical cruelty toward the warmth of shared humanity. The artists who memorialized these punishments in woodblock prints and haiku understood that, though pain resonates, so does resilience. Let that resilience settle inside you, let your chest rise and fall in a slow, even rhythm, and know that here, in this twilight of Edo memories, you are safe. Leave behind the weight of judgment and permit yourself the tender freedom to drift. The flickering images of kabuki masks and punishment scenes now fade like distant thunder, leaving only the soft glow of understanding. Rest, dear listener, for the past is but a story carried on the wind. In its echoes, find solace, and let it carry you gently into dreams. Soon, even these words will quiet like settling snow, and you will slip into the calm embrace of night's hush.